Chapter 12. Life is, in fact, a battle. Evil is insolent and strong, beauty enchanting but rare, goodness very apt to be weak, folly very apt to be defiant, wickedness to carry the day, imbeciles to be in great places, people of sense in small, and mankind generally unhappy. But the world as it stands is no narrow illusion, no phantasm, no evil dream of the night. We wake up to it again forever and ever, and we can never forget it, nor deny it, nor dispense with it. Henry James. The voicemail light was flashing when Grace got home from exercising. A feeling of relief came as she listened to the woman state that she had an appointment with the psychologist, Dr. Gwen Abrams, tomorrow morning at 10. Driving down the boulevard, Grace saw that the business of the day was in full swing. People, grocery carts, and vehicles were circulating through Safeway's parking lot. Driving past it all, she stopped at the fourth light. Grace turned left and headed down Sepulveda towards the airport. Thankfully, she arrived at the office on time. Dr. Abrams had a new office, now on the 6th floor. It was in a new structure of steel, marble, and glass, joining the other high-rises in the area. Gwen's practice must be doing amazingly well. Room 615 was more than just a room. It was the whole west end of the floor. Her secretary was busy working, but when she looked up, she saw Grace through the glass wall. Grace pushed through the doors and tried to address the secretary from a distance. "Grace Moretti to see Gwen Abrams?" The lady smiled and nodded. "Yes, I see you have a 10 o'clock appointment." She picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Grace Moretti is here for her appointment." She looked at Grace. "She'll be right with you. Go ahead and have a seat." Grace stood near the couch in the waiting area, but did not sit in it. She was too nervous to sit, apt to leave if the doctor didn't come out soon. Besides that, a man was already sitting there. She caught him looking at her once, even though he was supposedly reading. Maybe he was reading, but maybe he wasn't. What was he doing there? With the way she felt right then, every person in the place might be a potential killer. Her heart was pounding. If she shook much more, the doctor would notice. She tried to take some deep breaths to calm herself. "Miss Moretti." That voice. After 10 years, she still remembered it. She turned. There stood Dr. Gwen Abrams. She was very slim, with light blonde hair and beautiful grayish-blue eyes. She had a sort of luminosity, that rare quality of self-assurance. She had a good figure and was wearing a tailored suit that accented her narrow waistline. Grace's trembling was so great, it was hard for her to keep it from showing. She stiffened her body to remain steady, forced a smile, and extended her hand. "Hello." Gwen shook her hand. "A pleasure to see you again. Come this way." She turned, and Grace followed her back towards her office. Gwen hadn't changed. She was still the same distinguished, stylish woman, the same articulate scholar Grace admired. She would recognize her anywhere. She led Grace into her office and offered her a comfortable padded couch. Grace reclined and found herself looking up at just about everything. Rorschach inkblot paintings lined the walls of the office and seemed to tower so high overhead that she felt like she was sitting in the bottom of a deep well. The room was dead silent, like a morgue. Gwen took a seat in a high-backed, hand-tufted executive chair and relaxed for a moment, studying Grace's face, her hands clasped in front of her. Grace looked back and tried to smile. She was beginning to feel the silence. It felt wrong. Someone should be saying something by now. "So you're here to discuss the events of the last few months?" Dr. Abrams asked, still relaxed, leaning back in her chair. She knew how to listen with a particular animation, sensing what to ask, when to laugh, when to turn away with a tilt of her head and look as if she was concentrating in deep thought. Demons dropped through the roof of the office to observe the meeting. Black, bulb-eyed things, with dark wings whirring, spewing scandalous comments. The smallest one, with spidery arms, hollered desperate chants filled with panic and confusion. The others joined in with a hideous chorus of profanity as vapors of red smoke rose to the ceiling. The early morning briefing at headquarters had left them apprehensive. There was concern that Grace's visit to Gwen Abrams might actually be harmful. Was it enough that the sleepless nights had offered moments of anguish and bewilderment? Was Grace unbalanced enough, or would intellectual rhetoric be helpful? It was a bit disappointing to see their work devalued. An ultimatum was ordered that they must secure their victim once and for all. Do not let a temporary excitement distract you from the real business of undermining Joe's faith. Satan wanted a full account of the doctor's visit and Grace's reaction to it. Let each of you think how to use this doctor's visit to our advantage. Be alert, for it has certain things inherent in it which may, in themselves, be dangerous to our cause. If we aren't careful, we may lose our grip on Grace. Those last words sent fear trembling through their ranks. Lying on a couch next to Gwen made Grace apprehensive. Yes, I think, Grace began, I think I'm just very overwrought and lonely, and that's why I keep hearing voices. Immediately, Grace examined the counselor's face for her reaction. There was none. Her expression was stoic. Gwen asked, What kinds of voices? What kinds of things do they say? Grace thought for a moment, blankly staring with her baby blue eyes. 1 minute she knew what she had wanted to say, and the next minute she felt that part of her brain was dead. And Gwen was just sitting there, not saying a word. Silence filled the room. The air felt stuffy, even though the room was air-conditioned. Did Gwen's eyebrows just go up? Her look isn't exactly disapproving, but is that because she's supposed to remain neutral? But it feels definitely disapproving to me. What I'm experiencing is legitimate, she whispered. I'm not crazy. Yes, I understand, Gwen said. Don't be nervous, I won't bite. But do you think you can be a little more precise on what they say? Tell me about these voices. Grace nervously laughed. I'm still a bit new at this, but I'll try to remember. When I'm alone, especially like late at night, when I'm laying in bed and can't seem to fall asleep, it's like a script to a horror movie, and I'm the star. The voices warn me of impending doom that my friends will soon experience. I feel suffocated with anxiety. Idly, Grace toyed with the ends of her hair as she studied Gwen's face. Insanity, his lips moving incessantly, shipped words right into Grace's brain. My hope is lost. I'm a worthless creature. It's only a matter of time, very little time, until it happens. Madness interrupted. I'm insane! Even though her mind was a little scrambled, she had to say something. But Terror was indignant and determined to have his way with her. He hung on her back like a vicious leech, sucking out her will, whispering confusion into her soul. The other 3 spirits that were also there circled Grace, taunting her with unkind words. What was I thinking? Why did I agree to come? Why didn't Joe just leave me alone? Grace stared blankly at the ceiling. Nothing intelligible would come to her mind. What was that thought? She just had it. She was going to say more, and now it was gone. Gwen smiled a little, but had no idea what to say. She had known Grace for over 20 years, and she always seemed sane. Yet, with all the events of the last year, Gwen remained open to the possibility that Grace was encountering some type of neurotic psychosis. Would you excuse me for a minute? Certainly. Gwen rose from her chair and hurried from the room, leaving Grace alone in the dark, oppressive room. The silence closed in again, heavier than ever. She had trouble breathing, as if her chest were collapsing, as if the air were too thick to breathe. It had to be her imagination, the stress, the nervousness. Grace closed her eyes and opened them again. The room still seemed dark, maybe darker. High above her, the walls holding the paintings felt like they were leaning in upon her. At the same time, the ceiling, close as it was, seemed to be escalating even further, making this pit deeper. Like most art forms, A Rorschach abstract allowed the viewer to determine his or her own interpretation of what was seen and what the painting meant. All Grace saw was a room full of evil, menacing, demonic beasts. Looking at the painting closest to her, Grace noticed that the shadows had a shape, an animated, creature-like shape. Its leering, bulbous eyes reflected the stark evil it held. Its gnarled head protruded from hunched shoulders, and rows of jagged teeth lined its mischievous smile. Grace closed her eyes. She did not want to believe that her tormentors were lurking about. "Why are they at the doctor's office? What have I done to deserve this? I'm not an evil person. Maybe it's something Joe's done to curse our family." She felt helpless, as though her path of escape was sealed off. Try as she would, she could not shake the evil presence. Her palms were wet, her skin was crawling. The room was alive with evil and about to crush her. Had she made a mistake and walked into a death trap? When Gwen returned to her office, she found Grace looking quite wilted and noticeably white. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked. Grace smiled weakly. "Oh, to be honest, I didn't sleep too well last night. Nerves, I guess." "Oh, I'm very sorry. Let's try to proceed with the few minutes we have left. Grace," she asked, "do these voices ever say who they are?" She could hear the voices in the room taunting her, and it felt like sharp claws were rubbing against her skin. They remained invisible, hiding from her, teasing, tormenting, and making her feel like a fool. Grace didn't feel like proceeding, but she did. She thought for a moment. "I think one of them is from the Bronx, and the other sounds Chinese. They always sounded so confident, as if they were warning me of events that are coming. They keep telling me that Joe is the problem. I should divorce him, or even worse, kill him. Can you help me?" she asked with pleading eyes. Fear saw his opportunity to finish her off. Grace was overcome with numbing, paralyzing trepidation. She willed herself to listen to Gwen, to think. He whipped her consciousness into a myriad of senseless thoughts. She would continue to answer Gwen's questions, but the session would be of no help to her. "When did you first start hearing them?" "It was a few days after the children's funeral. I asked Joe if we could move to get a new start, but he just laughed and said, 'Are you kidding?' I get so lonely and spend hours crying. I feel trapped like a caged animal with no way out." "How did they introduce themselves?" "I was alone, and it was almost like I heard them on the radio. Strangely, they asked a question and I answered them. They said they were there to protect me so that nothing bad would happen, and that I should be careful when I was with Joe." Grace began to shed some tears. "I'm so afraid most of the time." Gwen didn't know what to make of this. Interesting was all she could say. "I always thought that Joe and Grace had a perfect marriage." Grace looked at Gwen with pleading eyes again and said through her tears, "I know what I heard was real. Not a dream, not a hallucination, not figments of my fractured mind and hyper-imagination. Whatever you think, whatever anybody thinks, I know what I heard. I hope you'll believe me. I've heard you are the best counselor in town." "Is there anything else you want to talk about before you leave?" Gwen asked sympathetically. "You must be more than a little traumatized by all this." "Will I ever be normal again?" she asked, her voice subdued. "Time does seem to help in these matters," Gwen promised. "How soon?" Gwen shrugged. "A few years, maybe less. It might be different for you. I've never treated anyone who has gone through what you have. It should be interesting to see how all this affects you." "Interesting?" Grace repeated. "I'll keep you out of trouble." "I know. I trust you." Grace's voice was monotone, dead. Like most health professionals, Gwen had treated a few patients who heard voices. She preferred the wealthy, less problematic patients who really just wanted to have a friend to talk with. The world was often judgmental of their worldly, eccentric behavior. Most of them were easy to handle with antipsychotic medications. the kind that could be treated with the one-size-fits-all solution. For Gwen, the content of any psychic distress, and certainly the meaning of it, mattered less than the fact that it could be fixed with drugs. When more difficult clients came to her, she just referred them to her associates. Gwen took a deep breath to steady herself. Time to take a recess. She knew she needed to process this, and she might even have to consult her colleagues. It felt as though she had entered the twilight zone. After stretching out her legs, she crossed to the ankles of her feet, trying to get comfortable. She said, trying to be comforting and non-judgmental. Listen, I think it's been a fruitful hour. Oh, it has. I feel so much better now that I've told someone. Gwen had been sitting in her chair, turned slightly away from Grace, looking at the paintings on the wall and speaking in fluid sentences, her fingers spread and her hands bouncing against one another, fingertip to fingertip. She turned her chair so that she was facing Grace directly. Her eyes narrowed, and a smirk, it looked malevolent. No, it looked like Joe's, slowly spread across her face. Now, with hardly any pause at all, but with a strange, ominous change in her tone, she continued her comments. Would you like to come again? Next week at this time? Yes, that will be perfect. Gwen stood up to give Grace the hint that the session was over. They really hadn't covered much ground, but that was enough as far as she was concerned. Now, let's both take some time to ponder these things. After a week, they may be a little clearer to us. They might make more sense. Gwen's voice sounded dubious, and Grace could hear that. Her eyes appeared dark and critical of what she had just heard. That would be wonderful, Grace affirmed. Getting Grace out of the door was such a relief, and easier than Gwen had expected. Gwen closed the door and leaned against it. Oh, my God, was all she could say. Above and all around, demons were following Grace. At least 10 taunting, torturing spirits were following her, buzzing about her head like angry bees. They followed her home. Her mind began to race again. She could hear the voices calling, mocking, cursing. Were there spirits in the car? She didn't see any, but she could still hear the slimy creature that was yelling at her. She wanted to be home. Their lips stretched open, and their jagged teeth clicked and gnashed as they hissed out horrid thoughts. The loudest spit out insults like bullets from an assault rifle. Grace turned on the radio to drown out the horde of noises playing in her head. Yet the thoughts still came, with the bursting rhythm of popcorn. Memories of her children and the devastating thoughts of the murder scene raced through her consciousness faster than she could watch them. "Stop!" she screamed, and there was finally a moment of silence. Overwhelmed by her experience, she let her tires find the curb and rolled slowly to a stop. She slumped over the steering wheel and allowed the hate and fear to crush in on her. It was worse than she could imagine. The force of it took her by surprise. My life is broken. All is lost. I'm on rocky times. Nothing will restore the harmony and balance I long for. Why do I feel so weak and failing? I'm so tired. I've been pushed beyond the limits further than anyone should have to bear. I'm the black sky without any light. I feel so panicked. I'm lost. The rest of the drive home was a blur, but as soon as she walked in from the garage, the voices overpowered her. Don't you blame anyone else but Joe. No one else is responsible for the trouble you have gotten into. It's all Joe's fault. You should hold Joe responsible. Tell him it's over. After all, there is only so much you can take. Entering the kitchen, Grace turned to look at Joe. Oh, Joe, Grace sobbed. She tried to smile, but instead bit her lip as she turned to look at Joe. Joe's eyes bugged wide, and he jumped to his feet. What happened? Grace, are you okay? He quizzed. She shook her head furiously, trying to find her voice. A fresh wave of panic shattered her brief sense of confidence. Brushing back her hair as tears dropped one by one to the ground, she tried to cry softly, which was hard to do when her emotions wanted to rush out and punish him. Trying as hard as she could, she was still unable to think of even one redeeming quality in Joe's horribly egocentric personality. "I hate that I married you. You've become so insecure and dependent. Yet when we go out to dinner, you stare at other women and forget that it is me standing right next to you. I used to think you were the handsomest man alive. Now you're smelly, have bad breath, unkempt fingernails, and you wear wrinkled clothing. You're such a pig." She was infuriated that his carelessness had disturbed her so much that she'd spewed out a great deal of her anxiety and dread. "Oh, go to hell, Joe! You're so irritating and mean. What's happened to you?" She wore nervousness and disapproval on her face. "Nothing. Leave me alone." "How did your appointment with the doctor go?" She didn't answer. Joe looked at Grace's face for a moment and then nodded. It was answer enough. Grace turned toward the fridge so that Joe couldn't see her face. She closed her eyes and sighed deeply. His eyes were anxious. It was mind-boggling, but somehow he still hoped he had some type of hold on Grace. Joe anticipated a different greeting. He found himself wondering if he should even go to her, comfort her, and put his arms around her. Would she believe he cared, and, if it were at all possible, that he would change everything back to the way it used to be? He did care. He went to her and gently put his hand on her shoulder. "I won't give you any pat answers," he said quietly. "I know this has been as hard on you as it has been on me. But deep down inside of me, I know there is an answer that will make it better. I know I've said this many times, so I won't say it again. I'll keep looking, and when I've found the answer, I will let you know. I won't ask anything of you until then." "I love you," she said as she wept. "I love you too, Grace." She walked over to him and embraced him, giving him a kiss he would remember for a long time. A kiss when she held him desperately tight, when her face was wet with tears, when her body shuddered with her sobbing. Joe held her as tightly as his weakened body could, as if he were hanging on to his very life. He would use this priceless treasure to get through the battle that lied ahead. Even in all that had happened, and with the unbearable stress, Joe did not give up. Sure, he grumbled and whined. Just the other day, he was saying everything comes in threes. Our dishwasher is busted, our refrigerator and freezer are dead, and now there is a leak under the sink. Fun times just keep on coming. Funny, he would say fun times sarcastically when it was really no fun at all. With his back against the wall one more time, he made an attempt at praying. He tried very hard indeed, sometimes through the entire night. At the end of the time, he still felt troubled. At least he'd made a start, he thought. That was something. Yet he was still plagued with one question. Why? Joel was pacing back and forth, his voice echoing off the walls. "I can feel it coming. The enemy is luring Joe into a trap." Michael nodded his head and remained deep in thought. "Exactly what I was expecting. Satan has spent eons practicing and perfecting his deceptive ways. And succeeding too often, I say. Yes, but things are going to be different now. People's eyes are opening, and they can now see the truth. They know who the true troublemaker is. Finally, with new scientific discoveries, they can see the impact of what they say in quantum physics." Joel wondered, will Joe win? Michael leaned back against the wall. "We will have to wait and see."